Hold your applause. Hold your applause. This is the man, Ira Sachs, everyone. Director and co-screenwriter. I'm Alison Bales. Happy to be here tonight. Thank you all.
It's important to me that I don't know, the movie is somewhat musical, and they always raise the lights right when the piece is going, and I always feel like it's part of the movie. So thank you for indulging that.
Well, perhaps sometimes we don't appreciate that every decision that goes into a film, which is, because I always get angry when people talk through the opening credits, and people do talk through opening credits, and I think, no, the director has chosen this music, he's shot a sequence, or he's overseen an opening credit sequence. A lot of decisions go into your job, and the music is very important.
A lot of decisions do go into it, but I think one of the interesting things about making this movie is that it's a film about control and lack thereof. And it was a movie that we made in the Centro region we shot for about 5 weeks, and it's a microclimate. We were shooting one day over 5 weeks. The weather changed generally by the hour. And in the course of 5 weeks, there was a hurricane. There was a major forest fire. The last scene, that's actually burnt land. There was the hurricane was the first in 200 years in Portugal. So there was this feeling, and I think early in the production of that acceptance was necessary, that we were not going to beat nature, and that certain things that would happen out of accident were actually, so you control things, but actually accident is equally important. So for example, the scene with Greg Kinnear and Isabelle Huppert inside a kind of tile-laden atrium kind of space that was supposed to be outdoors in the sunlight, but it's indoors, and it actually really affects the scene for that reason because the weather had changed. So it was a film of acceptance.
Not least of all, is the subject, which is someone dying, and accepting, perhaps more than her family's able to accept.
I mean, really, to me, when I think about the film now that it's finished, it was always a film about life, and that came from many different experiences that we all brought to the film. But I think specifically for me, in the last 5 to 7 years, I'd been closer to illness than I had been previously, and I'd been closer to death. And what really struck me is that they didn't exist in a certain way, and that life seemed to exist in all its ugly beauty. Up until the very, very last moment, and that those contradictions between the kind of profound and the petty, between the comic and the tragic, were always part of my personal experience of being around illness, and I wanted the film to sort of share some of that contradiction. I guess for me, when I watch the film, I think of it, and I'm just talking, I'm here, but this is a film which I hope is an open film where people can interpret as themselves. But for me, the film seems more about loss than it is about death, that there is a feeling of coming to terms with some absence. I think the film sort of turns on the moment where Brendan Gleeson watches his wife in the bed, and that's also the moment where I believe for the audience, many of the threads have come together, and you begin to really be part of the family or part of the relationships in that moment. And I think he's so good at conveying the loss that the film does really, I think, speak to.
But at the other end of the spectrum, you have the young, the grandchild, the girl, the young girl, starting out, and there's a very different feel to that thread of this tapestry of her experiencing possibly her first kiss, and the way you shoot that on the beach, that beautiful scene. So I think that's a huge contrast to perhaps what we think of as the main story line.
Well, I think as I've two things, being in throughout my 40s and now in my 50s, and also ever since I've got very involved with watching Ozu, it's very hard for me to look at character without thinking about 3 generations simultaneously. there's almost like not a character without someone from the past and someone from the future, some involved with who they are. I do think it's significant that both Isabelle Huppert and Michel, played by Pascal Gregory, speak to their parents and to certain questions of history in Europe, and I think that's part of the kind of the tapestry of the film. It was also, I have to say, that young actress, Sania Nanua, she's as good as Isabelle Huppert. For me, she was such a natural. I found really she could make things vibrantly alive and real without any work, effort. And that's actually when talking with Isabelle about the film, that's the thing we spoke about most directly, was for her too to create a performance in which she removed the effort. The way I described it and we sort of understood was the idea of removing irony from her performance. And that was something she found very interesting and maybe something a little bit different than she'd been asked to do in recent films.
And when you met with her to talk, I mean, I understand that she approached you initially to sort of start your relationship. And then you wrote this with her in mind. But when you talked to her about the role, do you know, obviously she speaks English very well, but was there any kind of barrier there, language, culture? She's slightly older than you. She has an enormous filmography. Yeah. I mean, she goes back a long way and she's made a lot of films. Yeah. But where was the common ground?
I think she's an amazing person, which is maybe obvious, but for me, it was different than I expected. She's a very ambitious person, but not necessarily in a narcissistic way. She's ambitious to experience things in a very direct and real way, and she's very ambitious about art and her relationship to art, both as a viewer and also what might happen when she creates things. And that's very exciting to be around. So you actually feel like you're making her first film, because for her, it's sort of like that. She lives very much in the moment. And so I think we connected maybe in a history of cinema that we share a love for, specifically for me around Maurice Pialat, who she had done the film Lulu with, and Pialat as a figure in French cinema was someone who we both understand a kind of realism that was important. So we had backgrounds together. She's half Jewish, I will tell you, which is a very interesting thing that I did not know. And as a Jewish man, I felt that there was actually cultural things that we shared in, and that again, I feel like, not that in this film she's Jewish, but she's connected to family in a way that I felt very familiar with. So she did not seem foreign to me. I've directed in Danish, Vietnamese, Russian, and Spanish, and now in French, so and a little bit of Portuguese. So I've directed in a lot of different languages that I don't speak.
But, you know, she's Isabelle Huppert. I mean, like you said, she's worked with Pialat, she's worked with Chabrol, Haneke. You know, a little bit nervous when you met her, no? Of
course. I mean, particularly the first time I met her, I was in a lobby, and I remember walking in circles many times before I walked into the cafe where we were meeting. But over time, not so nervous. And yeah, that went away.
That went away. I'm very interested by her. How much did she get involved with her look in the film? Because I know there's a huge contrast between her and Eileen, who's in flowy dresses and flat shoes, and Frankie is very tailored, and she wears heels even when she's walking in the woods. She's very sort of pulled together. Yes. Was that an Isabelle input, or like how? It
was an Isabelle collaboration. Granular. I'm involved. You know, they don't have that many costumes in the film. She has the most. I think she has 3. Marissa has 2. And both those actors, and I have to say Brendan Gleeson also, they really knew their look. Brendan Gleeson was like, I was like, I want to have a talk about the costume, and he was like, no, this is what I'm wearing. and luckily, I mean, if I hadn't liked what he was going to wear, then we would have talked it through. But I liked his ideas. And I would say similarly, Isabelle and Marissa both are actors who the exterior is very important to their understanding of the interior. So they spent a lot of time thinking. Isabel, we worked with a woman named Khadija Ben Said, who is the costume designer for Isabel and her costumes, and there was a lot of fun talking about clothes and going through her closet, and a few things were from her closet, and that was kind of fun, being in Isabelle Huppert's closet.
Wait, her own closet?
Her own closet. She's very open.
Oh. Did she bring any of her own stuff?
I think there's a jacket that's hers, the black leather jacket at the end that she wears up that stairs. That's hers.
Now, if you write a script for Isabelle Huppert and you make her an actress, yes. Where does real life and your script, where's the crossover there? I'm in general try to write characters for actors where they will not be asked to transform in any way. That doesn't mean they're playing themselves, but I'm not looking for someone to do a transformation in their performance. I'm actually looking for someone to bring themselves and to let the character kind of be the access point to something that's very direct about who they are. So it felt very natural. She also really looks like an actress. She just does. Like, she sort of presents herself in the world, and it felt very natural to me that she would play that. I think for me also, people with creative professions are ones that I know more familiarly. So occasionally I've had ideas to do films about maybe some business or real estate or something that I know nothing about, and very quickly I don't write those films because it's very hard it's hard to write intimately of people who you can't imagine knowing intimately. And Marissa, you've worked with her a couple of times now. So, and I have to say, the chemistry between Marissa and Isabel was fantastic. I mean, I felt like they were old friends. And I understand they didn't really have a lot of time to get to know each other, correct?
Correct. I don't know if when I was shooting the two of them together, I suddenly, particularly the scene where they're walking after Isabel has fainted and they're walking through the woods and she ends up telling her what's been going on. And I started thinking about Entre Nous, the film that Isabelle Huppert had done in the 80s, and which is a film really about female friendship. And that was a moment where I was looking at Isabelle Huppert today and remembering someone I'd known 30 years ago, and there was a kind of interesting overlap of the actress Isabelle Huppert and the character of Frankie for me. They are, well, I think casting and performance is all about an instinct of how people in their acting styles will bridge and meet each other. And they're both very detailed, emotional actors who are both have a lot of precision, but also a lot of freedom. And that's a very interesting mix. So I had a sense that they would do something well together. I don't rehearse my actors before we start shooting, so they haven't heard any of the lines from each other until the day of production. So I think there is this something that happens in the moment, which I tried to create the opportunity for, and then let them discover things.
So when you say you don't rehearse, do you run through the lines for lighting and stuff, or are you shooting like the first take?
Often shooting close to the first take, but I'm blocking. I'm telling them where to move, and you shoot a scene, usually for 5 to 7 or 12 hours. So you're rehearsing as you go because you're shifting things and changing things. The thing that I don't want to happen before the camera rolls is for anyone to have two things. I don't want them to have an idea of what they will hear, because then they begin to decide how they will respond. And once they've made a decision, then it's less complicated than the decision that would come from the interior. And the second thing is I really don't want to have conversations where we discuss what is subtext or motivation or intention, because again, you're then reducing things to something playable, and I'm trying to avoid that possibility.
Ostensibly, the film is about a family coming together on a vacation, yet you don't shoot the family together until the end of the scene. What was your thought behind that? There's no dinner table where everyone gets together.
Yeah.
There isn't a big family.
I'm sure we
scene.
talked a lot with Mauricio Zacharias, my co-writer. We definitely talked. I think there was at some point some idea of a scene, and it just didn't feel necessary. There was nothing motivating them coming together. Also, this film is a fiction. It's a very theatrical film. It takes place in one day. There's 9 characters. There is also a fictional version of the town of Sintra, because Sintra doesn't go up. Like, that's not how the town works. But we created an idea of 3 levels of the town, and the town itself, this kind of magical forest in the middle, and then the top of the mountain. And through the kind of cinematic construction, the whole film aims to them getting somewhere. So it made sense that they would only get one place, not like have lunch in the middle and then get somewhere else together.
Do we have questions from anyone in the audience? Right here at the front.
I wanted to ask you about the importance of co-productions, particularly with France and Saïd Ben Saïd, in producing these indie features, which are hard to finance in today's Avengers world. And also your background in French film and how it inspired you in your career and working with one of its finest film stars.
Thanks. I do think that there's less space for these kinds of films in the market, and they're hard to activate. Saïd, almost similarly to Isabel, has people that he has seen their work, and
This is the producer.
The producer of the film is a man named Saïd Ben Saïd. And he has another film that opened today called Synonyms, which is amazing. So and another film coming called Bacurau, which is a Brazilian film. But Synonyms is at the Quad, and it's such a visually cinematic film. So I highly recommend it. He's 2 things, which is great. He's a cinephile and he's a good businessman. And I think it's a very good combination, which not everyone has both those things. And so he somehow makes these things work financially. And for me, I'm working on another film with him now, and I'm thrilled. So it's been a great collaboration. French cinema. I was in Paris as a student who didn't speak French in 1986, and I spent 3 months there, and I ended up seeing. And I had very few friends also, and I ended up seeing 197 movies in 3 months. and it changed my life. I have to say, I did discover people like Piala and Truffaut and Chantal Akerman and some great French filmmakers, but it was the first time, this is 86, that I'd ever seen a film by John Cassavetes. I saw all of Vincent Minnelli. So there was a kind of embrace of cinema it's just kind of a place that I felt very stimulated and excited and never anything but curious. And I think that's for me. But I think since then, French cinema, particularly contemporary French cinema, has probably been the most important to me as a kind of conversation or a challenge in terms of my work.
And you thanked François Ozon at the end, I noticed, and he's like the supreme director of women, I think, French women. I mean, look at his films, yeah. And he just loves those great French actresses. What did he help you with on this?
He gave me some ideas for casting on the film, and he was just supportive. I only met him maybe 2 years ago, but he's just making a film in France. He was giving me a lot of advice about how to work there.
I have to say, the first scene of the swimming pool made me think of the Charlotte Rampling swimming pool movie. Was that intentional in any way?
No.
No. It's just a swimming pool with a woman in it. I mean, there's...
Well, okay, I'm going to tell you something. To be honest, the width of that scene was partially because, and you're the first audience I've told this, the actress wanted the camera to be far away because it was a topless scene, and she just preferred distance, which I respected. So that's literally where the width of that scene was connected to other accidents.
I love that. I love hearing that it's serendipity, right? Something like that happens, or there's a budget, you can't do something, so you end up with something that's perhaps better than what you wanted. Another question.
I thought one of the purposes was that Frankie wanted everybody to be settled with her death and their situation, and I thought she wanted her son to be happy, so she was bringing Eileen for her son. Then at the end, we see Eileen, Marissa Tomei, is with her current husband, and she has an expression when she's looking at them, first sort of surprised, then maybe happy. I wasn't exactly, could read into that. I was wondering what you were thinking on.
It was interesting shooting that shot of Isabel watching the two of them, because I rarely do this, but I sort of was like, you sure you don't want to do one take with a little bit more? And she was very clear that she had done enough, and I agreed with her, because there is the mystery of what's going on. And also, this was something when I worked with Chris Cooper on a film once. He said, when you're on, you don't know what I'm going to look like when I'm 10 feet tall, and you don't know what my eyes are going to tell you that you can't see. And I think Isabel has also an understanding of film acting. It was intentional. You know, there is a line where she's compared to Greta Garbo or Fatty Arbuckle, whichever you prefer. And I think it was an intentional construction that the end of the film is silent, and that we're working with the faces and the bodies as storytellers instead of with words. And I think what she felt is for all of you to interpret. Yeah.
Thank you. How often do you incorporate feedback from your actors in your work, and is it difficult on set?
Sorry,
I'm a big fan of your work.
Oh, thank you. Incorporating feedback. I do not, as I said, I don't rehearse, but I do spend a couple of hours with each actor, kind of reading the script together and their scenes together, and I'm interested in what. I feel at every stage it's important for the person who's the most active to fully understand what they're doing. So, for example, my co-writer, Mauricio, knows that at some point I have to own the script. I feel the same way with my actors, that if they don't understand something, I cannot tell them how to understand it. Like, they're never wrong, if that makes sense. Sometimes they're difficult, but they're never wrong. And I'm interested in what they have to say about the language. At a certain point, the script is done. I'm not looking for the improvisation that I get from the actor is really emotional. Is what they bring. I guess what I would say is something that Isabel has said about the film now that she's seen it a few times and talked about it, and I think she maybe understands this in a way that neither of us did, is that the film is really, she is the director in the film. She's the person who's trying to construct the story. She's trying to control it, and she will fail to do so. And I think as a director, I'm always aware that I have intentions, but I need the actors to actually lead me to what the movie is. So I don't know if that answers the question, but there you go.
It sounds like there's collaboration.
Yeah, there's a lot of collaboration. The challenging thing for this, I'll just say one last thing, is we were really watching and looking. My relationship with my cinematographer is probably, when shooting, the most important, even more than to the actors. And we were really studying Eric Romer's work, particularly Pauline at the Beach and Claire's Knee, and a kind of construction of how to work with the actors where the camera never cuts for emotion. It never cuts in. The actors have to move towards the camera or they have to leave the camera. So you can never say, now I want more emotion and I'm going to make a close-up. That's not the rules of the cinema that we were making. So what that means is it's actually almost balletically choreographed. It's down to this phrase and that phrase. They need to move in a certain time, and the challenge is to make that natural. The other challenge, and this is what I've discovered, is that Eric Romer did not work with movie stars. And I think there was a really smart reason, which is movie stars don't want to do what the director tells them to do. Like, they want to understand why you want me to cross here. So there was this interesting kind of negotiation where I would say, you have to. And that was never enough. So there was always a kind of figuring out of how to make it theirs, but also do something that was quite physically precise. And that was one of the interesting parts of making this movie. Thank you all for coming to the movie. It's very glad you're all
Thank you
here.
very much,
Thank
Ira
you,
Sachs.
Allison.
Good night, everyone.